for our lecture, and we'll go ahead and get started. Today we're working on chapter 2, all right? And the chapter 2 is essentially, it says monitor going to sleep. I don't know what that means. Well, that still works, that's all that matters, all right? Chapter 2 is all about chemistry, okay? I remember on the first day of class, I had you guys raise your hand, and I think we only had one biology major. Is that correct? No chemistry majors? All right, well, my goal of today is as you walk out of this classroom, you're going to feel like a chemistry major for at least 2 hours or however long we're here, right? An hour and a half, okay? We're going to be talking about how living things are organized from atoms to molecules. We talked a little bit about that on Friday, and how atoms are what is the building block or the Legos of the big picture. Everything that is living can be broken down to those very small particles that we can't even see with a microscope in this building. We'd have to go to like some major science lab, maybe like NASA or something, to be able to look at an atom. That's too advanced for us here at Wartburg. All right, we're going to talk about pH. Has anybody ever heard of pH before? Okay, acids and bases. We'll talk a little bit about that and why it's important to living organisms. We're going to talk about the 4 macromolecules, okay? Do we have any finance or economics majors out there? Business? Yeah? You know what the difference is between macro and micro? Good.
Micro is like smaller, macro is like scope everything.
Yeah. So maybe in high school, I took macroeconomics, I think, in high school. But you had the choice between like macro or microeconomics. The 4 macromolecules, this just means that they're molecules, but they're a little bit bigger than just like a carbon dioxide molecule. They're bigger than an oxygen molecule, okay? And that they are found in living organisms. We're going to talk about the structure and subunits. All right, subunits, think of like a submarine. It goes below or kind of breaks it down. So what are those subunits and the function of these 4 macromolecules? A little bit bigger. They're molecules, but they're bigger than just a normal molecule. We're going to talk about how proteins are organized and how their shape is important to their function. We're also going to talk about DNA and RNA and how they are similar and different. All right. All right. So matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. Okay? You can start to make a list in your mind about everything that has matter. This door that I just closed, it matters, but it's made up of matter. All right? The chair you're sitting on is matter. You are matter. You take up space and you have a mass, okay? That is the term matter, all right? A oxygen molecule is made up of matter. It takes up space, right? The water molecule, if you think about it, in the water bottle that's in your bag or whatever, that water molecule, the water itself, takes up space, okay? That is matter. Elements are the basic building blocks of matter that cannot be broken down by chemical means, okay? What we could do is we could take that water, don't want to trip one of the first 10 minutes of class, right? We take that water and we put it on the stove, turn it up to hot. I'm going to make some mac and cheese because I like mac and cheese. And you turn on the heat, it starts to bubble, right? And it's maybe some steam starts to come up, okay? So I'm kind of changing the form of that water, but I'm not breaking it down from what it actually is, okay? I'm not, a god or anything like that, or a goddess. I can't break it up. It's an element, right? I maybe broke it down into some hydrogen and oxygen because it's going up into the air, but it's still hydrogen and oxygen somewhere, okay? I didn't create it and I didn't destroy it, even though if I left that pot of water on the stove for a while, it would evaporate and go away, right? But it's not going away anywhere. It's just becoming something else, okay? Same thing when you think of like if you go to have a campfire with your friends, okay, you've got some wood and you strike your match. All right, cool. The wood like goes away, right? It doesn't really go away. It kind of turns into ashes and little bits and pieces of things. It just changes what it actually is, but it doesn't just go away, right? So matter is not created or destroyed. All right, so those elements are those basic building blocks. Elements, examples of elements, and we'll see it, is like the periodic table. Maybe you've seen it in a high school science class. It's that big table that kind of looks like this, and it has boxes in it. We're going to show a picture of that here in a little bit, but it kind of looks like that. You guys remember that? Periodic table. Every single little box is an element, okay? So oxygen is an element. Carbon is an element. Hydrogen is an element. There's 93, so I'm going to stop my list right there so I don't bore you, okay? And atoms are the smallest units of those elements. So if we were to essentially break down oxygen, which I physically can't do, it would eventually get broken down into atoms, this molecule right here. Those are the smallest units of that element, and they remain the element's physical and chemical properties. The amount of atoms that are in one of these is what makes it a different element and have different chemical properties. Okay, think of iron. Does anybody know what iron's letters are? Yeah, Fe. Fe. Did you think that too? Yeah, Fe. All right. Is iron, I'm going to give you some options. A gas, a solid. What is iron? In its natural form, like if I laid some iron out on the table, what would it look like?
It's solid.
Yeah, it's solid. Yep, right? But if I laid some oxygen out on the table, there, I just did it. Okay? You guys can have it. It's yours. All right? It's a gas. Okay? So the smallest units of that element remain and contain those elements' physical and chemical properties. Oxygen and iron have a different number of atoms that make it up. So it has different properties. It has a different number of electrons, protons. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But those atoms are what make the chemical and the physical properties different. It makes oxygen different than carbon, different than hydrogen, different than iron. Okay? I told you we'd look at that table. Guess what? You don't have to memorize this table. And actually, I have a science degree and I've never had to memorize the entire table, which is great. This is actually a condensed version of that table. Okay? It's called the periodic table. And from this table, you can find the atomic symbol, the atomic mass, and the atomic number of each of the elements. Again, this is a condensed version of the bigger periodic table. This just has some of those main elements that we'll be talking about here for a little bit, okay? The first thing is called the atomic symbol. That atomic symbol is essentially the letters that make up kind of like, I guess, a symbol or abbreviation of what the name would be. But we just gave a couple of examples here. Oxygen, it makes sense that it'd be O. Oxygen starts with the letter O. Carbon starts with the letter C. Hydrogen starts with the letter H. Iron starts with the letter Fe. Nope, that's not it, right? Iron doesn't start with the letter Fe, at least not in my language anyways. And so not all the time does the letters represent the name strictly as it is. Anybody know what this one is? Sodium. Good. And then when you put sodium and chloride together, what does that make?
Sodium chloride.
Sodium chloride. It makes salt. Yeah. So those atomic symbols are essentially the names of the elements, and it helps us to identify them. But don't get caught up on the letters. Don't look at this Fe for so long and be like, is it fierce? Is it, it could be something else just because the letters are different, right? I had to think of something with an Fe in it. That was really bad. Fierce starts with Fi, doesn't it? F-I-E-R-C-E. Okay. Atomic mass. All right, the atomic mass, and if you're kind of cheating and looking ahead, it's actually not cheating, it's thinking critically. Atomic mass is right there, all right? It's the bottom number in the little square. I think of these little squares as like a little hotel room, right? It's a little hotel room, and sodium takes up this hotel room and gives us some information about sodium, right? Sodium has atomic mass of 22.9, okay? You'll see that every element on the table has a different atomic mass. Okay, that kind of makes sense, right? I said that all these elements were made up of different atoms. If you've got a lot more atoms, you're going to take up a lot more space. You're going to have a little bit more mass most of the time. So in other words, we're looking at the atom mass, or what makes up that element's mass. Okay, so that's that atomic mass. And then the atomic number is the number on top of the little room, the little box. Here we go, 3, 4, 5, 11, 12, 13. That's the atomic number. And it gives us some information, but it's not indefinite. So sometimes we can say that that atomic number is the amount of outer electrons, but it's not always the case. There's some that are just not rule followers because they like to be rebels sometimes, and that's okay too. And we'll talk about that here in a second. All right, so we have these subatomic particles of atoms. So you've got an atom, right? We've got the little cartoon in our mind, a little circle with the orbity things. It looks like a little planet, okay? The little particles that make up that atom are neutrons, protons, and electrons, okay? I'm a Disney fan, Captain Marvel. Does anybody know what Captain Marvel's like power is or what she's made out of? You've got a 1 in 3 chance that it's one of these up here. Not neutrons. Not electrons.
Proton.
Protons, yeah. Look it up. Watch the movie later if you have Disney Plus. All right. She is made of protons. I was just watching Endgame this weekend. All right. She's indestructible. She can pretty much do anything. It's pretty awesome. Okay. So we've got neutrons, protons, electrons. Luckily for us, their names kind of give away what they do. Okay. When I see the word neutrons, the first 4 letters are neut, which also could be for neutral. These have no charge to them. They essentially kind of pair up with these protons and they have no charge. They're just neutral, okay? Something that does have a charge though are protons and electrons. Electrons, I remember it by elect, like electric, all right? And if something is electric, I think of it being negatively charged. Protons, like starts with P, so does positively charged. Okay, so the words kind of give it away. Protons are positively charged. Neutrons and protons make up the nucleus. And then electrons are negatively charged and orbit around that nucleus. And you're like, what are you talking about? I need to see a picture of that. Okay, here it is. All right, so here's a couple of examples. We've got carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. This is a figure in your book, 2.2. It's saying the atomic structure of select elements. What this means is atomic, the word here meaning atom, so we're thinking very singular, small structure of these specific atoms. This is like one element of carbon, one element of nitrogen, one element of oxygen, one element of hydrogen. But we know in order to make water, you need 2 elements of hydrogen and 1 of oxygen. So we're just looking at 1 hydrogen, 1 of all of these, okay? So with carbon, we have this thing that says 6p, 6n, and then we've got some blue dots around the outside. What does that mean? There are 6 protons and 6 neutrons in the middle of that nucleus. This is the nucleus. That last slide we just had said that protons and neutrons make up the nucleus, okay? It's kind of a common mistake to think that the protons and the electrons come together to make the nucleus and that they're like positive and negative and they like equal each other out. That's not necessarily the case. The electrons are actually what orbits around the outside. Those are those outer shell electrons, that I was kind of talking about a little bit, okay? Hydrogen is the same way, except for it just has one proton. And if you kind of remember from a couple of slides ago, all right, these numbers are matching up with how that periodic table is organized, okay? So let's keep carbon in our minds for a second. It said that it had 6 protons and 6 neutrons. All right, I'm curious. Let's go back. Does anybody see carbon on here? Yeah? Okay, the atomic number was 6. All right, so that's saying that there are 6 protons and 6 neutrons in the nucleus. Okay, it also has 6 electrons. Remember nucleons. Neutrons are neutrons do not have a charge. They are neutral. Okay? But if we had 6 protons and 6 electrons, 6 plus 6 is about 12. So the way that this is organized tells us a little story about carbon or about oxygen or things like that. It's telling us how many protons, how many neutrons, how many electrons to an extent. Like I said, there's some rule breakers, some rebels out there that don't agree with the middle part of the table. Some of them are a little bit more advanced. But for basic chemistry and for the things that we need to know, just know that this atomic number tells you a story. Hydrogen, remember we saw 1 proton and 1 neutron in the nucleus? And that number 1 there shows us that story. Okay, same thing with nitrogen and oxygen. All right, if we go back, nitrogen is number 7 right there, oxygen number 8. On the bottom, you can see that it's made up of those electrons. If you count the ones on the outside, there should be 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so this is actually a neutral particle because we have 7 protons and 7 electrons and 7 neutrons. So 7 plus and 7 minus equal each other out. So it's not a charged particle. There are some instances where elements are charged, but we're not going to worry about that for this class. All right. But what does this matter to us as people who are studying biology? Why are we taking so much time on chemistry? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, it helps us to understand how things are broken down into the smallest particle. Essentially, we're working with those building blocks to have a bigger and bigger understanding of what makes, that foundational stuff that we need to talk about. Also, I told you that there were some things that are charged, all right, some things that are not neutral particles. And these could be examples of isotopes and radioisotopes. And before I get into those definitions, it's important for radiation and imaging in the medical field. All right, so isotopes, as it reads on the board here, are atoms that have the same atomic number, but a different atomic mass because of the number of neutrons. Okay, so let's think about that for a second. It has the same atomic number. So let's just say the atomic number was 12. All right, do we remember what 12 is? 12 is that magnesium? Yeah. Magnesium, cool. This is just an example, all right? We could have also done carbon. Carbon's a good example. We can do carbon next if this one doesn't make sense. Okay, it's the same atomic number. Remember, this one's the atomic number, but the isotope would be that this number underneath is different. All right, remember I said at the beginning that usually the protons plus the electrons, or you can think of it as the protons plus the neutrons, make up that number here. But now we're saying that that number is different because of the number of neutrons. So if this is protons plus neutrons, and now we have a different number of neutrons, we're going to have essentially some sort of different element. Even though it's still going to be magnesium, it's just a little bit different, okay? And the reasons it's different is because of the neutrons. Radioisotopes then are useful in dating old objects. So maybe an archaeologist would find an old object and use radioisotopes to date it and see, oh, this was from this time frame, and you know, this artifact was part of this culture, things like that. It can also help with imaging body organs and tissues through X-ray, also killing cancer cells. You've probably heard of somebody going to have radiation if they have cancer. And it says radiation can be harmful because it damages cells and or DNA that is or is not causing cancer. So that's also why somebody who's going through radiation may be a little kind of different than normal, maybe a little bit more sick, maybe losing some of their hair, maybe a little bit frail skin, things like that. Essentially, while it is killing the cancer cells, it has a possibility to kill a couple of the other good cells as well. I'm not a cancer specialist by any means, but what we do know is that these isotopes and these radioisotopes are really helpful for when it comes to imaging. This is a picture out of your book, 2.3. This is talking about medical uses for low-level radiation, okay? So the top picture here, it says it's missing a portion of the organ, all right? This is an image or kind of a scan of the thyroid gland, okay? The thyroid is important for a lot of different things, and it's a gland, okay? A couple of the main ones, it helps regulate your body temperature. It helps with your metabolism. I could list off a couple other things, but they're not coming to my mind right now, but those are the two main important ones, okay? And your thyroid gland, through imaging, they found out that it was missing a portion of that organ. So it was probably some sort of defect in that organ. You've also got a picture there of somebody getting a radiation scan of their brain. And you could see the different imaging here in the different colors. Again, I'm not a radiologist, but these isotopes, the chemistry behind it, helps us in this 3D medical world that we have. Okay, so we have the word molecule. Molecules are made up of atoms that are bonded together. They can be made of the same atom or of different atoms. Okay, we've talked about molecules before. Does anybody remember an example of a molecule that we did talk about on Friday, or a new one? What's an example of a molecule? Water. Water, yeah. So here's an example of how it's made up of different elements, right? We have hydrogen, or two hydrogens, and an oxygen. Anybody else have another molecule? Yeah, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide. Carbon, di, meaning two, oxide, oxygen. Do you have one here too? Me? Yeah.
I just said it.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Don't forget about this one. You need this one to have this one. At least in our case. Plants, it's the other way around. Good. Okay, so this is a couple of examples. How it says that it can be made of the same atom. This is the same thing times two, right? That's a molecule. So it's made up of more than one element. Or it can be made up of different elements. Like that one. Or like that one. Okay, so this one's the same. Those are different. Okay, those are considered molecules. So we have an atom. We have those atoms that make up elements. And those elements make up molecules. Okay, we're getting bigger and bigger here. These elements that make up molecules can be bonded in different ways. Okay, when you have a bond with your friend or your significant other or your family member, when you have a bond with someone, you've kind of got like this connection, right? You've got this like organic connection. Well, we're going to talk about that from like a chemical standpoint. Their connection between other molecules and other elements. This first one is called ionic bonds, okay? This type of bond donates or takes on electrons. The way that I like to remember this one is called I donate. I don't know, maybe I donate to Goodwill, I donate plasma, This is the phrase I like to remember. I donate. All right. The I donate means that the connection that they have between each other, one of them is donating electrons to the other. This results in a stable outer shell. This occurs between particles that are charged. An example of an ionic bond, which I think we look on the next slide, we do. So I'm going to hold off for just a second, but we look at like sodium chloride. Okay? Sodium is positively charged and chloride is negatively charged. All right? And if we go all the way back to the periodic table, we can find that chloride, and we're going to get we're going to jump a little bit further in understanding here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So chloride has 7 outer electrons. I figured that out because of the column number. That's how many outer electrons it has. All right. You don't have to memorize that, so don't worry. All right, so we've got chloride here. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sodium has 1 outer electron because it's all the way to the left column. Do you guys see where sodium is? Column 1, row 3. Sodium has 1 outer electron here, and when they go together, they donate that and they become stable. Okay, so this is a donation. Donate. Cool. So let's look at that at a little different imaging, okay? Because my artistic skills are not the star of the show here, okay? So here is a sodium and a chloride atom, okay? Now you see all those blue dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, which is correct because that's the atomic number, but it has 7 on its outer shell. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, because it was in the 7th column, the atomic number was 17, so there's 17 blue dots, 7 of them are on the outside. When it doesn't have 8, it's kind of alone. It's scared. All right. It's kind of unstable, right? And what it wants to do is it wants to find that bond or that connection to its friend sodium to complete its outer shell. All right. That's really cheesy. I hope that that makes somewhat sense. Sodium, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 is the atomic number. 1 is the outer shell because it's in the first column. 1 plus the 7 are on the outside here makes a stable outer shell. Now they both have 8 because 8 is that special number that makes them stable, and that is an ionic bond. So the way we remember that is I donate. The I stands for ionic. You can read that way in the back there. I donate. Okay, seems simple. Now we've got some salt. Feeling a little salty. But now we've got covalent bonds. All right. So not all elements bond like this, right? You've got like some friends that you bond over TV shows, and you've got some friends that you bond over favorite podcasts. Or maybe you bond over a favorite sports team, but you all bond in a different way. Okay, this is another way that some elements bond together. We want a stable outer shell. We want to have those 8 electrons on the outside. All right, atoms in this type of bond share electrons, okay? I think of it like the word co, meaning share. Okay, you can think of it like your co-worker, like someone you work with at work. Has anybody ever heard that? My co-worker that I work with at work. Yeah. You could have your co-captain on the sports team. All right. These are going to be share. Okay, that's the word here. Share is your keyword. So we've got two things so far. We've got I donate and co, that means share. So let's give an example of what that looks like. Okay, so here we have water, right? Hydrogen dioxide. So it says when an oxygen and two hydrogen atoms covalently bond, water results. So water is an example of a covalent bond. And let's show what that looks like here, okay? Here we have oxygen. All right, remember that oxygen has 8 protons, 8 neutrons. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on its outer shell. All right, remember 8 is our key number here on the outside. It needs to find 2 friends now, or a friend that has extra 2 to share because it wants 8. All right, and hydrogen has 1. We're going to need 2 hydrogens because oxygen wants to be 8 on the outside, right? 6 plus 2 equals 8. So then what would we do? We have 1 oxygen and 2 hydrogens, and then they decided, let's just share those little atoms on the outside so that I can have 8 and you can have 8 and we'll just have 8 together. All right, so now the purple are included in these blue. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen, water molecule, covalently bonded. It also kind of looks like Mickey Mouse. All right, here's another one. Oxygen is an example of a covalent bond. The other determining factor here is that while these are charged particles alone, some of them are not just positive and negatives coming together, okay? Because we have 2 oxygens, right? Technically, oxygen is negatively charged and hydrogen is positively charged. And when you bring them together, they even out, a positive and a negative. But if we have oxygen and oxygen, they're both negatives. So the charge doesn't matter here. The charge mattered in ionic bonds, and that's how you can kind of tell the difference, okay? Oxygen, we've got 2 oxygens, and what they decided is if I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the outside, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the outside, well, what if we just share in the middle, so I can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 together. So we can kind of share these ones. That's a covalent bond, okay? When we're talking about the strength of a bond, think of those friends that you have in your life that are like, wow, my ride or die friends. Those are the really strong ones. Those are going to be your ionic bonds. That's that friend that you're going to donate that shirt to when they have a big event on the weekend. And you're like, you know what? You keep it. You can just have it. It's my favorite shirt, but you know what? You're my best friend. Covalent bond is like, hey, let's go share a pizza when there's not COVID going on. And we're still good friends, but I kind of want some pizza too. You know what I mean? I'm not just going to give you my whole pizza. I don't like it that much. Okay? So those are a couple of examples of covalent bonds. Now, water is kind of cool. All right? When you think about water, you think about the water in your water bottle. You may think about the water in a pond or lake or a river or the ocean. All right? But what makes water water? Well, water is liquid at room temperature. So most likely the water in your water bottle, unless it's steaming hot water from some tea or something, it's liquid, right? At room temperature, it is liquid. Okay, the opposite of liquid would be like a gas or a solid. So it's not a gas, it's not a solid. Liquid water does not change temperature quickly. I wish it would, right? So I can make my mac and cheese like that. But the longest thing it takes for mac and cheese is for that water to start boiling, right? Either that or I'm just so hungry and a watch pot never boils. But liquid water does not change temperature quickly. It's not like I just change it by 1 degree and it's like poof, boiling. Poof, it just froze, right? It's got to be like some drastic changes or a little bit longer heat or a little bit longer cold temperatures for it to actually change. All right, water has a high heat of evaporation. Anybody know the degree of water at which it evaporates? I'm gonna get the exact number wrong. I think it's 112. Is that right? Was that what you thought?
I was just thinking it was 212 Fahrenheit.
212, you probably are right. I'm gonna check it out. I knew there was a 12 in it. And now I wanna make sure that I'm right. Degree in which water evaporates. Let's see here. Yeah, 212, there we go. I got my one number off. Okay, so it's 212 degrees Fahrenheit at 100 degrees Celsius. You guys know the difference between Celsius and Fahrenheit? Most people, not in the United States specifically, talk about degrees in Celsius. The United States likes to use Fahrenheit a lot, so if you go and watch the news, they're going to talk about the temperatures in Fahrenheit. Scientists usually use Celsius. All right, so water has a high heat of evaporation. If outside was 212 degrees, I'm not going to go outside. So that's pretty hot. Frozen water is less dense than liquid water. What does that mean? So the density essentially is like how much, so volume is how much space that it takes up. The volume, like the volume of a cup, is like 8 ounces and things like that. The dense frozen water is less dense than liquid water. Water's pretty cool in that sense. Molecules of water cling together, and they cling together through hydrogen bonds, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But aren't you so glad that when you drink the water, it's not like drinking marbles or anything like that? It's like, it's somewhat liquid. They cling together, right? We're so thankful for that. And water is a solvent for polar molecules. Solvent is essentially like what it can be dissolved in something. All right, so we're thinking of like, for example, like when you put sugar in water and when you put salt in water and the difference between those two things, okay? So those are a couple of things about water molecules. And I did just mention that hydrogen bonds are how water molecules attach to each other. And you're like, hold up a second. You just told me that water is a covalent bond. I did within its own molecule. So here, all right, we've got your 2 hydrogens and your oxygen. And right here is a covalent bond. They're sharing their pizza a little bit, right? They're still bonded together, but they wanted to each benefit mutually from this experience, right? The way that water molecules attach to each other is through something called hydrogen bonds. I'm just going to write hydrogen because you guys know what I'm talking about, okay? That's right here. That's how water molecules attach to each other. Hydrogen bonds are probably one of the weakest, if not the weakest, type of bonding. Okay, yeah, like it says, it's relatively weak bonds. So in order, if you could separate water molecules from each other, it's kind of the reason why you can have some water and then pour half of the water into another cup. Okay, but if I wanted to break down the actual molecule of water, it's going to take a lot more than me just dumping it into a cup. Okay, these occur between hydrogens in a covalent bond, and they are negatively charged atom. So again, here's that example. If you don't like my drawing, here's a drawing from your book, figure 2.7b. All right, here's your oxygen. It's that red part. It kind of looks like a piece of candy. But here's that oxygen, here's that hydrogen. This is covalent bond, this is hydrogen bond. All those blue dashes or purple dashes, well, kind of blown up on the screen, those are called hydrogen bonds. They're relatively weak. All right, we're moving on from water a little bit. We have a little bit of a different topic in our hands now. This is acids and bases, okay? Acids and bases are essentially what we talked about with pH, okay? pH, you've maybe seen that scale from 0 to 14 and how acidic or basic something is, okay? So acids are substances that dissociate and release hydrogen ions. Essentially, I think of them as positively charged. They've got a bunch of hydrogens, okay? Bases are substances that make up hydrogen ions or release hydroxide ions, so they have OH negative. Okay, that's kind of a bigger definition of essentially these are going to be our low numbers and these are going to be our high numbers from 0 to 14, and kind of in the middle is that neutral. And I'll tell you what we're talking about here. We're talking about the pH scale. It's a measure of the concentration of hydrogen ions, or essentially how much hydrogen ions do we have. It's a working scale between 0 and 14, with 7 being neutral. Okay, so about halfway through 14 is 7. From 0 to like 6.9, stuff is going to be kind of acidic, positively charged. From 7.1-ish to 14, they're going to be basic, negatively charged, and we'll talk about some examples of those here in a second. The concentration of hydrogen ions between each whole number changes by a factor of 10, and we don't really worry about that in this class very much. But what I really like to show is this scale. This really puts it all into perspective, at least for me, okay? If you're a visual learner, this is going to help you out. This is figure 2.10 or 2.10, the pH scale. All right, here's that scale from 0 to 14 that we were talking about. And what's really cool is they kind of have it color coordinated here, unless you're blue-green colorblind. Anybody blue-green colorblind? I'm so sorry if you are. You are blue-green colorblind? Yeah?
Not blue, but pretty much everything else.
Okay, pretty much everything else. Cool. I'm sorry about that. It's a genetic inheritance. We'll talk about that too. Okay, so you have things that are fairly acidic, and then here we have pure water, which is neutral. Okay, which is really important. Maybe you've heard of the myth that says if you're stranded in the woods, you're supposed to drink your urine. I wouldn't do that. All right, the acidic level, your body's going to not be able to break that down as well. It actually will counteract itself. But pure water, thank goodness, is neutral. So then you're like, wait a second, hold up. I eat tomatoes. I have Coca-Cola and beer, and I, do all these other things. Milk is somewhere in here for basic things. Black coffee. Are you telling me I can't drink my own urine? I mean, I guess it's up to you. But we've got this scale here. We've got like pure water, seawater, baking soda, the Great Salt Lake, household ammonia, household bleach, sodium hydroxide. Me, when I go to Target and get Starbucks, I'm pretty basic right here. Okay, so that's your acidic to basic scale. All right. Another way to think of this is like when you go to, have anybody ever gone to Buffalo Wild Wings? And they have those really, really hot wings. Wait, I don't even know what they're called. Blazing Hot Challenge or something that randomly came to my mind. I don't know how I know that. I've never done it. All right, when you're eating something really spicy, maybe you're eating some jalapeno peppers or some ghost peppers. When something really spicy is in your mouth, do they tell you to drink water? No, you probably shouldn't drink water because it's going to amplify that spiciness in your mouth. What do they tell you to drink? Milk, right? So something that's super acidic and spicy, like the Blazing Hot Wing Challenge, would be counteracted by some milk, right? It would kind of neutralize that really spicy in your mouth. But if you put a 7 of pure water, it's really going to not neutralize it as much if you would normally drink it with milk. So that's just another kind of cool thing about the pH scale. We're going to talk about something else moving forward, and this is a cup. Whoop, I had too many. This is 2 different reactions. I don't have you memorize these reactions, but the words I'd like you to kind of think about. Okay, so when we make and break organic molecules, such as, what are we doing here? This is just an example. With, like, let's think of like a protein or things that are kind of a bigger molecule. In order to make or break those things, we either have to add or take away water in order to do that, okay? Your dehydration reaction essentially is the removal of water that allows the substrates to link together into larger molecules. So when we're thinking about making a larger molecule, we're going to have to remove some of that water, and I'll show you a picture of that on the next slide. The other thing I'd like you to know from this slide is a hydrolysis reaction. This is the opposite of a dehydration reaction. This is the addition of water that breaks larger molecules into their subunits. So the way to remember these two is if you're really dehydrated, man, what do you do when you're really dehydrated? You either A, go get some water, right, or B, you're gonna have to go to the hospital and get an IV, okay? So dehydration is the removal of water. When I'm really dehydrated, okay, you got some cotton mouth, whatever that is, okay? Hydrolysis reaction is the addition of water. It breaks larger molecules into their subunits. Hydrolysis, hydro, water, okay, adding of water. So that's the difference between those two. Just a little brief demonstration of that. So the first one, are you okay? You good? Okay, you can go and get a drink if you need to. The dehydration reaction is essentially, you can see they're removing this water molecule in the middle to make what they want to make. And then this one, we're adding water here to start with this, adding water to make what we want to make. These are the opposite of each other. This is figure 211 in your book, the breakdown and synthesis of macromolecules. Okay, there's that word again. Yeah.
So I'm working on like the exam 1 outline.
Okay.
You have, and it says like draw this out. So like these. So in like the exam, how you're not gonna have this draw it because it'll be online. So will we like label it kind of something?
No, it may just ask you the difference between a dehydration and a hydrolysis reaction, but it wouldn't have you draw it.
Okay.
It's just a study tool. All right. So yeah, this is a breakdown and synthesis of those macromolecules. Okay, there's that word again, macromolecule. All right, so let's talk about that. What's a macromolecule? Well, here is a list of the 4 macromolecules. And it's really important to know these 4. Okay, this is a pretty important slide. This would be a great question. What are the 4 macromolecules? All right, I can do that. We have carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. I get an A. All right, carbohydrates are essentially those things like when you think of like sugars and starches, that's your carbohydrates. Your lipids and your fats, all right, your fats, your oils, things like that. Proteins, like either in things like nuts and meat and things like that. And then you have your nucleic acids, which make up DNA and RNA. All right, so let's talk about what each of these mean. Okay, when we look at the macromolecules, there's a couple of things that I want us to know. I want us to know what they're made of. What is a carbohydrate made of? What makes up the carbohydrate? What is the building block? What is the Lego block of a carbohydrate? Okay, it is made up of subunits called monosaccharides. When you have more than one saccharide, they're called polysaccharides, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides here. The word mono, like when you think of mono, like one-on-one, mono just means one or singular. So when it's made up of single saccharides, monosaccharides, they're, I'm gonna trip again. They are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, in which the hydrogen and the oxygen atoms are in a 2-to-1 ratio. The function as short and long-term energy storage. All right, so we maybe have some athletes in the building. I used to be an athlete. All right, before competition, maybe your parents or your coaches would say, you got to carb load, right? You got to have some long-term energy. You got to eat your pasta, your potatoes, things like that. Okay. I had a soccer coach once when I was 12, had us eat Jolly Ranchers in between 2 tournament games. And you're like, what the heck? And guess what? He was a doctor. So there's 2 different types of energy storage, right? When you eat your starches, like your potatoes, your spaghetti, things like that, That's going to be that long-term energy storage. Okay, that's going to be the stuff that gets you going when you're a little bit, or maybe you have too many carbs like that. You go to Olive Garden, you had like 5 breadsticks, fettuccine Alfredo. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. What is she talking about? That food will actually give you a long-term energy storage. Your sugars, like your simple sugars, like a candy, or I'm trying to think of some fruit and things like that, more simple sugars are going to be that quick burst of energy, those short energy storages. So when I was 12 years old and I was at a soccer tournament and we had 2 back-to-back games, and the coach was like, here, have some Jolly Ranchers in between the game. You're like, what the heck are you doing, coach? But what he was doing was giving us that short-term energy storage. We needed energy right now, right? Have you maybe you've heard of that myth that like when you get done weightlifting, within 30 minutes, if you have just like a little bit of Coca-Cola, that short-term energy will help replenish those muscles? Weird things like that. Gatorade, the sugar in Gatorade is that quick energy storage. So you've got that short-term energy versus the long-term energy, okay? Especially if you're going to go out and run a marathon the next day, maybe have some potatoes the night before or some spaghetti, things like that. That's that long-term energy. They can be found as simple and complex, which kind of makes sense when we think about it this way. If it's more complex, it's going to take longer to kind of break it down, right? We've got this long kind of chain of polysaccharides here. I'm going to show you on the next slide quick, and then we'll come back here. Polysaccharides, okay? And the longer that is, the more complex it is, the longer energy storage, or essentially the longer it'll take your body to break that down as energy storage, okay? Then we have a monosaccharide, which is that singular ring, 1 carbon ring, as in found in glucose. Glucose is a sugar. This is a monosaccharide right here. This is one of them right here. A disaccharide, di meaning 2, is a 2 carbon ring such as maltose. Does anybody know what maltose can be found in? Anybody heard of like malt beverages? Maltose. All right, so some like alcoholic malt beverages. Maltose right there, a disaccharide. That means it's a 2 carbon rings, okay? So we've got monosaccharide, mono-y-mono, 1-on-1, right? Just 1 singular carbon ring. Disaccharide, 2 carbon rings. These are the building blocks, are what carbohydrates are made of, okay? Then we've got polysaccharides, which are poly, just meaning many. When I see the word poly, I think of many. When I was a kid, I played with Polly Pockets, and my goodness, there were so many pieces to that thing, right? Polly Pockets, many, many pieces, little outfits, little shoes. I had like a little slug bug car for my Polly Pockets. So many things, so many carbon rings, okay? All of these, look at, all those are carbon rings. Looks like a beads on a string, kind of, like a beaded bracelet. Those are polysaccharides. They're made up of a lot of those carbon rings. And these are going to be the storage form found in animals and found in plants, like potatoes. So when I was talking about, yeah, your potatoes, your spaghetti, or things like that, like wheat, the plants like that, those are going to be your long-term energy storage, which also makes sense because they're made up of way more carbon rings than the other stuff. So it's going to take longer to break it down, and your body's going to be using that for energy for a longer period of time. All right, we're doing okay. We're going to move on to lipids. Does anybody have any questions about carbohydrates before I move on to lipids? I tend to talk fast when I get excited about stuff. All right, we're going to move on to lipids. So lipids are essentially like your fats, okay? Your fats, your oils, and things like that. They do not dissolve in water, all right? Man, if fats dissolved in water, that would be the #1 weight loss thing in the United States. You just had to drink some water. Your fat would dissolve, right? That's not the case, all right? So lipids do not dissolve in water, but they can be used as energy molecules, right? They can be found in your cell membrane, which I'll show a picture of, and they can be found as fats and oils, phospholipids, and steroids. Steroids are a lipid, okay? And steroids are not just used to, you know, get utterly big and strong. You may use steroids like if you had a rash on your arm and things like that, or it's something wrong with your ear infection, they may give you a steroid, things like that. First thing we need to talk about is what's the difference between a fat and an oil? Fats are usually of animal origin, so things that are solid at room temperature. They function for long-term energy storage, and they're insulation from heat loss and cushion for organs, okay? So there's this like negative connotation with fats, but look at this. It says insulation from heat loss and cushion for organs. Okay, the reason that we even have fat on our body at all is to insulate and protect our most important organs, right? That's the main goal of fats. Your oils are of usually plant origin, and they're liquid at room temperature. Think of your vegetable oil, your olive oil, your coconut oil, things that you may use to cook with. That's the difference between fats and oils. One is room temperature solid, and one is room temperature liquid, and where they come from and what they're used for. You also have like oils in your skin and things like that, but that's a little bit different. All right, what's the structure of a fat or an oil? Okay, they are made up of glycerol molecules and 3 fatty acids. So the question is, what is the building block of a lipid? It's a glycerol molecule and 3 fatty acids. What's the building block of carbohydrates? It's monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides, which actually just breaks down to a monosaccharide. So this is the building block of fatty acids, or excuse me, of fats and oils. It's 3 fatty acid tails and a glycerol molecule. The way I remember that is this is the glycerol molecule here, and the 3 fatty acids. Kind of looks like a letter E or a flag of some sort, right? That makes up a fat molecule. And what's important to notice, and it's not super important that we memorize this, it's just a fun fact. Here we have some blue molecules highlighted right there. That is HHO, HHO, HHO. And we know very well from the theme of the day that hydrogen dioxide is water. And so when we remove those 3 waters, ooh, what reaction is that? Dehydration or hydrolysis? Dehydration, yeah, great job. I'm going to take those waters away, and I'm going to make this macromolecule called a fat molecule. It's made up of 3 fatty acid tails, bang, 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 fatty acid tails, and a glycerol molecule. All right, understanding fats when reading a nutrition label. The recommendation for total amount of fat for a 2,000 calorie diet is 65 grams. Does anybody know approximately how many calories Michael Phelps would eat when he's competing? It's way more than 2,000. Anybody want to take a guess? Throw it out there. Okay. 5,000, 6,000, it's 10. 10,000 calories. I'm like, what? Where? Like, yes, I left Olive Garden now and I had probably 1,000 calories, but I am full. I am full. How can you keep eating? I don't understand. All right, 10,000 calories. But for a 2,000 calorie diet, 65 grams of fat is the recommended daily amount. Okay? There's fats and things that you probably don't even realize. There's like bad fats, and there's actually good fats too, okay? It says be sure to know how many servings there are. So on a nutritional label at the top, it'll say servings per container, right? So if you go get your box of Cheez-Its after class today, unless you're gluten-free, I'm sorry, Cheez-Its gluten-free? No, there's gluten in Cheez-Its, I think. Anyways, Cheez-Its at the top, and you're like, I'm just gonna eat this whole box of Cheez-Its. Like, they're so good, right? I'm just gonna have a whole box of Cheez-Its. Well, there's probably like 13 servings in the box, so you should probably not eat the whole box. But you can if you want. Don't, let me tell you what to do. So being sure how many servings there are, but then you're like, but per serving, there's only like 10 grams of fat. That's not so bad. I can have 65 grams of fat in a day. Well, what it's telling you is that maybe you should get them from other sources as well, okay? A percentage of the daily value, so this is daily value, of 5% or less is low and 20% or more is high, okay? So it's saying of that 65 grams, if you have less than 5% of that 65 grams, it's not enough fat in your diet. But if you have 20% more than that 65 grams, probably too much fat. You ate the whole box of Cheez-Its, okay? That's probably too much. Try to stay away from trans fat. Okay, that's the key word right there. So when you maybe read a bag of chips and they're like coming out with all these like baked and new chips that say no trans fat, right? That's kind of the kicker there. The trans fat is the bad fats. It says, would you eat the following nutrition label? Why or why not? So let's look at the picture on the next slide. Should we eat this item or not? All right, for the people in the back that maybe can't read this as well, we've got the serving size is 1 cup and the servings per container is 2. So the total is 2 servings. All right, it's about 250 calories. This is a percentage of our daily value. All right, remember we were talking about fats. All right, so we've got total fat of 12 grams. You're like, okay, well, I could have 65 grams, so I'm doing okay so far. It's 18% of your daily value, okay? And there's 1.5 grams of trans fat, all right? There's some other things, too, that we should maybe consider. So this is cholesterol, all right? Has anybody ever, read the box of Cheerios on the outside? It says this helps with high cholesterol. Well, high cholesterol is not great because it can block your veins and arteries, and make your heart work a little bit faster and harder than it needs to, kind of wears your heart out a little bit more than it needs to. So having high cholesterol is bad. You can still have cholesterol in your diet. That's not saying X it out completely. Just something to keep in mind. Sodium, 740 milligrams, 20% of your daily value of sodium. Okay, sodium is that the salt, essentially. Total carbohydrates, we talked about carbs a little bit. This one has 31 grams of carbs. It's 10% of the daily value that they recommend for a 2,000 calorie diet. It has no fiber. It's got about 5 grams of sugar, 5 grams of protein, which we haven't talked about proteins yet. It has some vitamin A, C, some calcium, and some iron. All right, raise your hand if you would probably eat this. Yeah, that's okay. I probably would eat it, right? All right, there's nothing too bad about this food label, right? It's okay to eat this, all right? Well, it says to stay away from trans fat. There's only 1.5 grams of it. Probably not too bad, okay? The fats, while it is 18% of your daily value, it probably depends what it is, right? Is this a thing of some cottage cheese? Cottage cheese has a high fat. Is this a tub of ice cream? I'm trying to think of something that's not dairy if somebody's lactose free. Is this something that has a lot of fat in it? Guacamole with no sour cream in it? So it just depends on what it is. And guess what? I've taught this class 3 times and we still don't know what it is. Does it say what it is in the book? I still don't know what it is. But it's okay. So all we wanted to learn from this slide is understanding what it says when you're reading a nutrition label. Okay? It doesn't mean that Xing things out like fat and cholesterol. It just means moderation and looking at what it means and just understanding what it means in the grand scheme of your diet and understanding how it may affect your body. All right? So we're still talking about fats, right? We're talking about fats and oils. We kind of took a little detour to talk about nutrition labels. But now, let's talk about it a little bit on the smaller scale. This is called a phospholipid, okay? And the word phospholipid, when I look at the word phospholipid, it looks like phosphate and lipid to me. So when I look at the word phospholipid, it makes me think that there should be something of a phosphate and there should be a lipid. Well, we know that the structure is similar to a triglyceride. One fatty acid is replaced by a polar phosphate group, and the phospholipids are the primary components of the cellular membrane. So we have a cell, like an animal cell, and around the outside is your cellular membrane. Around the outside is your cellular membrane, and that cellular membrane is made up of these phospholipids. It's called the phospholipid bilayer. Let's say that one more time. Phospholipid bilayer, B-I-L-A-Y-E-R, bilayer. So this is the outside of the animal cell. This is the inside of the animal cell. This is the animal cell. I know it's an animal cell because, well, one, the book labels the plant cells all green, which is kind of cool, I guess. But also, the plant cell has a rigid cell wall. Remember, like the Great Wall of China, it's a rigid cell wall. An animal cell has this kind of like fluid outside protection. And that protection is this phospholipid bilayer. So if we have these polar heads here that look kind of like balloons on a string. Those strings are those nonpolar tails. The tails are the lipids, and the little balloon part is the phosphate. So let's, I don't think I have any better pictures on that, but we do talk about it when we get into the cellular structure and function section of class. But just know that a phospholipid is a lipid. It says it right in the name, right? It is a fat. Okay. You're keeping track? We've got, oh, I skipped one over to me. We've got about 10 slides left. All right, so stay with me here. We can do this. All right, what is a steroid? A steroid is a lipid. Okay, we talked about that when I first started talking about lipids in this section. Remember, just to give us a little bit of context, we're talking about the 4 macromolecules. The first one we talked about was carbohydrates. Second one we're talking about is lipids. Okay, so now we're into this lipid. A steroid is a type of lipid. Okay, the structure is 4 fused carbon rings, which means that they're kind of fused together. They're joined together. Remember the polysaccharides? They look like beads on a string. Okay, this one, they're all fused together. Kind of like, do you guys remember perler beads? I'm really, where you like put the beads on and then you iron them and they come out like a single structure. They're fused together. That's what this is. A steroid is those fused carbon rings. Okay? Examples are cholesterol and sex hormones. So testosterone and estrogen are steroid molecules. Okay, now we're getting a little bit. So when you have somebody has or uses steroid molecules or like a testosterone booster, things like that, that's a steroid, that's a lipid. Okay, not all steroids are bad. Like I talked about, like your doctor may prescribe you if you had some sort of rash on your arm, they may give you a steroid to take care of the rash. Okay, if you're an athlete, they're not going to, kick you out of your sport just because you used your steroid cream on your arm. The steroids that get people in trouble in like professional sports and things like that are when it alters their chemical makeup, and especially the testosterone molecule, in order to get like big muscles and like really strong. There can be a lot of adverse effects to that, such as like mood, anger. All right. Also, the sex hormone, because there's too much testosterone, has usually negative effects that males don't want to have, if you know what I mean. Okay. So the next one is proteins. Okay, so we've talked about carbohydrates, lipids, which are fats and oils, and now we're on to proteins. This is the 3rd macromolecule. They are made up of amino acids. Okay. Maybe you've heard of that word before. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. Remember carbohydrates, the building blocks are monosaccharides. Lipids is a glycerol molecule with 3 fatty acid tails. Those are the building blocks. Proteins are amino acids. These amino acids and proteins in general are important for diverse functions in the body. If you remember on the first day of class, I said there are 30,000 different types of proteins in the human body, and we only know about 10,000 of them and what their functions are. And there is research going on today, currently, somewhere in the United States or in the world, as kind of trying to figure out what those proteins do in our body. And all of them have an important function. And some of their functions may be to turn something off in your body. So we don't even know how to test for that. Or it could be to turn a certain thing on, a certain gene expression on in your body. Some other proteins that are important are hormones, enzymes, antibodies, trigger word, right? We know what antibodies are because we're talking about COVID all the time, right? Who has the COVID antibodies? Anybody know that they have COVID antibodies? You don't have to share. I guess you don't have to share. Wow, that was really personal. I guess you could raise your hand in your mind. If you have COVID antibodies, you also have antibodies in your body that are not COVID related that help you fight off infections all the time, okay? And then they also help with the transport of molecules in your body, and we'll talk about that. Proteins can denature, and notice how that word is bolded in red, undergo a change in shape that causes a loss of function. The best example I give of this is when I want to make some scrambled eggs, right? So I go get my egg, and I crack it into a bowl. And is that egg liquid or solid or kind of both? When I first take it out of the shell. Liquid? Yeah. I would consider it liquid, okay? Then I whisk it together. Does anybody put milk in their scrambled eggs, usually? I've also heard you can put butter or a butter alternative, and that tastes really good. Okay. Sorry if you're vegan. All right, I'm cooking up here. And then I'm going to pour them into my little skillet, right? And I turn on the heat. What happens to my eggs?
They become solid again.
Yeah, they become solid. I kind of want them to be a little fluffy. I also like them a little overdone, a little crisps on them. I know some people are like, oh my gosh, runny eggs or die. But what happens is I denatured the proteins, I changed the shape, and I gave it a different function. I added heat to that protein. You ever heard of eggs being one of the most complete proteins you can have? It has 16 different proteins in it, all right? And that's why a lot of people are like, ooh, eggs are so healthy, but it actually has high cholesterol. That's a whole other thing. But eggs are a really good meal, right? I just heated them up and I denatured the proteins. I changed its shape. I changed it from a liquid to a solid. And now it has a different function for me because I'm not going to eat a raw egg like that. Some people do. I mean, I'd eat it if it was covered in butter, flour, and chocolate chips, if you know what I mean. All right, so what do amino acids look like? Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. Here's some examples of amino acids. Okay, luckily for you guys, we don't have to memorize this. So we can just look at this picture and ooh and ah at it. Figure 2.21, the structure of a few amino acids. And just know that some of them are different than others, as you can see. They all do different things, but what we are really interested in, and I don't think we have a picture of it on this PowerPoint, but we do it in a different lesson in this class, is that when we kind of have a different combination of amino acids, we make a different protein. So if I've got all of these amino acids in a line, or if I had 6 lysines in a line, those are going to make different proteins. I think of them, I keep using the example of beads on a string. But if you're going to make a bracelet with some beads and you put on a red bead, and then you put on a green bead, and then you put on a yellow bead, okay? Or I could put on 17 red beads. I have 2 different bracelets. And those beads are those amino acids. And the bracelets are the different proteins. And so essentially what this just means is the amino acids, what they look like, their structure. I think there's about 25, I'm going to get that number wrong, it's 24, 25 amino acids. There may be a table in your book of how many different amino acids there are. The combination of those amino acids is used over and over in different combinations to make those 30,000 different proteins that are in your body and all over the world for different things. another really important thing about proteins is how they're organized. Okay, we talked about amino acids. Those are the building blocks. Those are the beads. If we just have one string of beads, that would be a primary organization of proteins. All right, we just got a singular bracelet right there. All right, the different organizations are then called primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. There's 4 levels of organization. And I like to do an example in class with a piece of paper. And of course I didn't bring a scratched piece of paper. Let's see if I got something in here. All right. I told you I go to Target a lot. Here's a Target receipt. Okay. So 4 levels of protein organization. When I make a piece of paper, all right, paper is made up of tiny little fibers, all right? They say, you know, like when you're using paper and things like that, like, oh, I'm going to save trees, right? You've heard people say that. I'm not going to print off this paper, I'm going to save some trees. Well, what does that mean? So the trees create, and things like that, make these little itty bitty fibers that make up a piece of paper. Here's what I'm kind of talking about, little fibers that make up a piece of paper. If you look really closely at your notebook paper, or really close at this, there's those little itty bitty fibers that make up your piece of paper. That's that primary, that linear, the simplest form, okay? Then we have a secondary, which is that localized folding into pleated sheets and helices. So now we've got a whole bunch of those little fibers that come together that make a piece of paper. So the singular, the primary, was the fiber itself. Then we have a bunch of fibers lined up together that make the piece of paper. That's secondary. Tertiary is in the 3D shape of the entire protein in space. So now I'm going to fold this piece of paper. This is a 3D shape of a protein. Okay? So we've got the fibers, we've got the paper itself, and we've got that 3D shape of the entire protein that's in that shape. Quaternary is in just more than one of those. If I had all my Target receipts from the last month, it'd be like that much. But that would be your quaternary. It'd be more than one piece of paper that we have out here. So those are the 4 levels of organization. All right, you've got the fiber that makes up the paper. You've got this piece of paper. You've got a 3D structure of the paper, and then you've got more than one piece of paper if I were to have more than one piece of paper. Okay, all proteins have primary and secondary and tertiary structure. So they're all proteins that at least look somewhat like this, but only a few have a quaternary structure. Okay, let's talk about that in a little bit more biological terms. Okay, so this is that beads on a string. This little dots, these little dots here are the amino acids. They are bound together by peptide bonds. This is a primary structure. All right, that's that individual paper fiber, okay? Secondary structure is just how it's organized. So all those fibers together, whether they are in an alpha helix or a beta sheet, makes up that like piece of paper, okay? So the piece of paper is just an analogy. Then we have the tertiary structure. We have a whole bunch of these that make up this. And then that's the tertiary structure. It's that 3D shape. And then we have a quaternary structure, which is just more than one of these. 1, 2, 3, 4. Primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary. All right. Doing okay so far? The last macromolecule is nucleic acids. So we've had carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and now nucleic acids. This is the 4th macromolecule. They are made up of nucleotide subunits. The function in the cell to make proteins. So this is the code that makes a protein. Well, essentially it makes an amino acid that makes a protein. It includes RNA and DNA. The words RNA and DNA, they stand for ribose nucleic acid, deoxyribose nucleic acid, nucleic acid, nucleic acid. This is a macromolecule, okay? It's what makes up our DNA. You guys probably know the importance of your DNA. It makes you different from the individuals next to you. It makes you different than your siblings. It makes you different than your parents. It's essentially like a code, like if anybody is really good at computer coding, but it's a code that makes proteins. So those proteins make our functions and our gene expressions in our body that makes you who you are, behavioral and looks-wise. Okay? There are 3 parts to a nucleotide. So what are the building blocks of a nucleotide? We have a phosphate and a sugar and a nitrogen-containing base. Okay? The phosphate is that yellow circle up there. All right, it looks like a little ball. It's then attached to a sugar. A sugar, if you can remember, is a carbohydrate, glucose. All right, and then a nitrogen-containing base, which means that there's a nitrogen present. These are the 3 parts of a nucleotide. Maybe when you were in high school, they gave you a list of letters, and you had to give the nucleotide bases that paired up with them. A's and T's and G's and C's. Okay, I had to do that in high school. I remember this. These are the 5 bases that are found in nucleotides. Essentially, the pattern of these bases makes a different code that makes the proteins, and the pattern isn't necessarily random. It is specific to genetics in a sense, without mutations, but essentially it's kind of random, right? The random assortment of A's and G's, C's and T's, and you and uracil, okay, are what pairs up to make the ladder of DNA. And we'll talk a lot about DNA in this class. So your A's and G's are double ring purines, and cysteine and thymine and uracil are single ring pyrimidines. You don't need to really know that as much. In a DNA molecule, A pairs with T and G pairs with C. The way that I remember that is the letters G and C both look like half circles in a sense, and A's and T's are very upright letters. In RNA, there are no T's. U is replaced in that sense. And I'll show an example on the next slide. So here's a DNA structure. You've maybe seen a picture of DNA before. It looks like a double helix or a spiral staircase. Okay? The DNA is made up of a sugar phosphate backbone. So here's that sugar and the phosphate. And then there's that nitrogen-containing base. This is the nucleic acid right here. Remember that first slide? That's the building blocks of a nucleic acid. A phosphate, a sugar, and a nitrogen-containing base. All of those work all the way down. The sugar and the phosphate make up the backbone, or essentially kind of the railing as you're walking up the spiral staircase. That's that sugar phosphate. And then in the middle, your A's and T's line up, your G's and C's, because it's a double helix. It looks like this. Okay? There's 2 sides to it. This is figure 2.24 in your book, the structure of DNA and RNA. The DNA structures with base pairs A with T and C with G. But in RNA, there's a G, a U, an A, and a C, and A and U pair together, and G and C pair together, similar to what they did over here. Okay, so here we have a uracil. There's no T's present in an RNA. And we'll talk a little bit later in this class about how DNA is related to RNA. But remember, what we're talking about today is macromolecules. The 4 macromolecules are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. This is a nucleic acid. It's made up of a phosphate, a sugar, and a nitrogen-containing base. All right, here's a summary of what DNA and RNA and kind of what makes them different. So DNA is a sugar. It's deoxyribose nucleic acid. That's what DNA stands for. It contains the bases A, T, C, and G. It is double-stranded. RNA is the opposite of DNA in a sense that the sugar is ribose. It's called ribose nucleic acid. That's what RNA stands for. The bases are A, U, C, G, which is different than DNA, and it's single-stranded, while DNA is double-stranded. All right, the last slide of the day. Here's a summary of the macromolecules. The 4 macromolecules, the examples. The word monomer just means building block, or like what's it made of. Carbohydrates are made up of a monosaccharide or a glucose, a single ring. Lipids are made up of a glycerol and 3 fatty acids. Proteins are made up of amino acids. And nucleic acids are made up of a phosphate, a sugar, and a nitrogen-containing base. And then on that last column there, it just gives the function. This is a good little reference tool when remembering what macromolecules do. What you would need to know about macromolecules would be this table. All right, does anybody have any questions? All right, you got chapter 1 due tonight. I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Chapter 2 is due on Friday.